Yuta might have just had the most important character development in the entirety of Jujutsu Kaisen, and I want to talk about it. But to understand why this moment is so perfect for him, we need to understand his character as a whole and how it evolves. So today, we'll be covering Yuta's growth from the beginning of Jujutsu Kaisen 0 to chapter 261 in order to evaluate why the Yuta Gojo moment is so perfectly depressing. At the beginning of Jujutsu Kaisen 0, Yuta is essentially a blank slate of a character. He has no backbone and, more importantly, no defining qualities besides being depressed and trying to avoid trouble, both of which are the result of Rika. Even in the face of bullies, his greatest concern is preventing Rika from coming out, as he doesn't want them to die. Obviously, he was not able to prevent their untimely deaths, as Rika does manifest and they all get smushed into a locker. This puts Yuta in the trope of the protagonist with an inner demon, not unlike Yuji Itadori himself. One difference between the two, though, is that Yuta doesn't seem to have any goals at the beginning of the prequel, whereas Yuji's goal is what gets him into the world of Jujutsu in the first place. Yuta is also a lot more scared of the world of Jujutsu than Yuji was, as we see him acting quite nervous and unsure of himself during the school trip with Maki. I don't want to recap everything that happens in Jujutsu Kaisen 0 because that would take a long time and I think would be kind of boring, so from here I just want to analyze a few key moments. One of the key themes of the manga that feels a bit underemphasized in the movie is unraveling the curse of Rika. It's not just curing it like what happens in the movies, it's about the process. And it is through this process that Yuta develops as a character and a sorcerer, as he learns through experience and from his fellow sorcerers. From Maki, he learns of strength, not just from their training, but also from observing her and hearing her history. Hearing Maki's struggles with the Zenin clan motivates Yuta to get stronger and become more resilient, and it was her that gave him the idea to harness Rika's strength in the first place after they were eaten by that cursed spirit. It was through her that Yuta was able to develop his first motivation, to be someone that others could rely on. Yuta and Maki have one of the closest character relationships in Jujutsu Kaisen, and it all begins here. It is clearly a relationship that Yuta holds dear to him because she taught him so much so early into his time as a Jujutsu sorcerer, and likely because he relates to her isolation. From Inumaki, he learns of kindness. While Yuta has been a nice kid since the beginning, he's always been passively nice to prevent people from getting mad at him so Rika doesn't get mad at them. Inumaki's kindness is different. It's kindness used to aid people, to take the burden on oneself instead of using it to avoid conflict. Yuta sees this, understands it, and decides that it is a characteristic he admires so much that he wants to make it a central part of his personality. And that's exactly what happens as the movie progresses. And finally, from Panda, he learns... well, I don't think he learns much from Panda directly, but Panda does tell Yuta about Inumaki's struggles in life with accidentally cursing people, which in turn further deepens Yuta's understanding of Inumaki, and helps show Yuta that he can help people too despite his struggles with Rika. These two aspects, strength and kindness, combine to become the most important aspect of Yuta as a character, his selflessness. This selflessness is first showcased in his fight with Geto. When Geto is about to use Uzumaki, he understands that the only way to save everyone he cares about is to sacrifice himself by giving himself fully to Rika. This is just the first of many examples of Yuta's selflessness, but it's also one of the most poignant. Had he actually died here, it would have been a pretty good end to his character, but he didn't, so we get to talk about the main series of Jujutsu Kaisen. From here, Yuta doesn't change that much as a character, but we do see his resolve to be selfless and his connections to other sorcerers deepen over the course of the series. While Yuta was absent from the first third of the main series, he is still mentioned a number of times, namely by Todo prior to the Goodwill event because he wants a run back, and by Gojo a number of times. First is in his conversation with Gakuganji where he says Yuta, Yuji, and Todo will be the ones to surpass him, and again in Shibuya when he tells Kenjaku that Yuta will fill his shoes while he is sealed. On the surface, these interactions appear to show that Gojo knows Yuta is strong and dependable, but I think it's also indicative that their bond goes much deeper. Gojo doesn't just view Yuta as a promising prospect like Yuji or Todo. Yuta is one of the few characters that Gojo finds himself able to relate to. This is mostly because of the philosophy that the strongest can only relate to others that are their equal. While Yuta was not Gojo's equal at any point, he was probably the strongest sorcerer Gojo ever saw up until Sukuna's reincarnation, which is still better than nothing, if that makes sense. It's like a tiger making friends with a house cat. They're more similar than a tiger and its handler or a tiger and a bird or something, but they're still very different beasts. We can see Gojo's excitement and interest in Yuta very early into Jujutsu Kaisen 0, where he seems to get extremely excited while Rika destroys the cursed spirit inside the veil. There's a good chance that this is the most powerful thing he has seen since his own awakening. All of this is to say that to Gojo, Yuta Yuta was more of a son or a close friend than just a student like Yuji was. And honestly, it kind of seems like Gojo cared more about Yuta than Megumi at times. But I don't know if that's really the case because we don't actually get to see Megumi and Gojo interact all that much, ironically. This connection between Yuta and Gojo is an important one that we will be coming back to later for obvious reasons. So for now, let's get into the manga with his reintroduction during Yuji's execution. This mini arc brings back classic Yuta, but now fully realized. From a character perspective, he's pretty much the same as he was at the end of Jujutsu Kaisen 0, but now he feels a responsibility to fill Gojo's shoes, which we will be delving into more deeply during Sendai. Aside from killing Yuji, Yuta doesn't do too much here. We do see that Yuta is still a very caring character, as he was concerned that Maki was up and moving about rather than healing. This reintroduction mainly aims to establish Yuta in his new strength, and show the reader that he is still the same caring person he was before. The next time Yuta is the main focus of the manga is the Sendai colony. When the Culling games were originally releasing, a lot of fans interpreted the arcs as Gege giving each of the supporting characters one last time to shine before Gojo was unsealed. Obviously, with some hindsight, we can confirm that this is not the case, especially for Yuta. Using the context that we have now, we can see that Sendai mainly exists for 3 reasons for Yuta's character. First and foremost, it is used to establish Yuta's curse technique and his strength in compared to other extremely strong sorcerers. The second reason is to establish Yuta as a Fujiwara, which is another strong bloodline from the Heian era. And the final reason is to establish Yuta's softness and merciful nature. We've always known he was a nice kid, but there's a difference between being nice and being a merciful fighter in the world of Jujutsu. It's explained that Yuta doesn't actually enjoy fighting. It's more something he does out of responsibility, and as such he doesn't want to kill unless he needs to. This can be seen clearly with Uro, who insults and belittles Yuta through their entire fight, yet is still spared by him in the end. Ryu serves as a much more interesting form of mercy. It's not the mercy that Yuta gave Ryu by saving him. Instead, it is Yuta accepting Ryu's challenge to go all out in order to fulfill his quote-unquote hunger. While this might not sound like mercy on the surface, it is in a way. He ended the battle in a way that Ryu could be happy with, even if it's not the way that Yuta wanted to end it himself. This, once again, is a show of Yuta's selflessness, putting the wants of his opponents above the wants of himself. This mercy leads to Ryu calling Yuta soft and stating that if he wants to reach the heights of Gojo and Sukuna, he first needs to divest himself of his humanity and become a calamity. Sound familiar? This contrast between humanity and monstrosity is brought up a number of times, especially in reference to Yuta and Rika, and we will be delving into it in a little bit. But first, we have to talk about Yuta's first round against Sukuna. And before we can get into that, I just wanted to say thank you. This channel just hit 50,000 subscribers, and we would not be able to get here without your support. So to everyone that has subbed so far, I just wanted to say thank you. It really does mean the world to me, and it is because of you that I can do this as a full-time job. So thank you. Truly. And if you're not subscribed, what are you waiting for? You obviously like the content, so just go ahead and do it. It's good for both of us. This 3-chapter fight is actually one of the rare moments where we get a bit of internal dialogue from Yuta, showing that he takes responsibility for Higuruma losing, as he was selfish for wanting to kill Kenjaku himself. We all know this probably isn't 100% true, as the heroes didn't know exactly how many cursed spirits Kenjaku would release upon his death, and as such needed Rika and him there in case it was a large amount in order to limit casualties. Instead, what's likely going on here is Yuta is realizing that his backup plan might have to happen. This is also likely a part of why he wanted the fight against Sukuna to end with him, as he knew that if his and Yuji's plan failed, everyone else would pretty much just be stalling for his next battle, as none of the remaining fighters are strong enough to put up a significant fight against Sukuna. This also makes it more probable that other characters will die as well, as they wouldn't have to fight in the first place if Yuta had ended it here. But I think the main reason Yuta wanted to end things here is so that he wouldn't have to take over Gojo's body. He doesn't want to forego his humanity or take over his father figure's corpse like that, but he does. And that brings us to the most important moment in Yuta's character, his move to Gojo's corpse. For the sake of simplicity, I am just going to call this Yuta for the rest of the video, rather than Yujo or Goda or Yugoda or whatever. The decision to put Yuta in Gojo's body is, in my opinion, one of the best decisions Gege has made in a long time. While it is sad that Gojo is 100% gone now and that the fake out from the end of the last chapter was just bait, this move makes a ton of sense for Yuta's character, and I think it puts him in the best possible position to have a filling conclusion as a character. It highlights the 2 most important aspects of Yuta's characters in a really twisted way: his selflessness and his admiration and connection with Gojo. As we have well established thus far, Yuta is selfless to a fault, and sacrificing one's humanity is possibly the highest form of selflessness that there is. It is damning yourself to isolation so that only other monsters, of which there are very few, can come close to understanding you. And in Yuta's case, it is also likely forfeiting his life, as there doesn't seem to be a good solution for Yuta to survive this transplant unless Kenjaku's technique only needs to be activated once. So it is not only damnation to isolation, it is also self-sacrifice, which is a really unfortunate fate for Yuta, as it kind of brings his character full circle, as he started Jujutsu Kaisen 0 isolated and trying to self-sacrifice. Yuta is one of the few characters that already understands what it's like to not have humanity, as the original cursed Rika robbed him of it. This is likely a reason that he tried so hard to hold on to his humanity once he regained it, and his humanity is unfortunately conversely tied to his selflessness. There is essentially a scale between the two that tips depending on the decisions that Yuta has to make. And while he obviously holds his humanity closely, he is one of the few people that understands the sacrifices that must be made for the greater good. Chapter 261 also shows that Yuta is one of the few people that actually truly cared about Gojo. As is made clear in the chapter, so many people are concerned about Yuta's safety and the ethicality of the decision to take over Gojo, yet no one seems to be concerned about Gojo himself, except Yuta and Yuji, but he wasn't part of this conversation. I think this is partially because of their strength. As is said by Sukuna, and as I mentioned earlier, the strong can really only relate to the strong, and in Gojo's case, I think that goes both ways. Gojo can't relate to the weak, and the weak will never be able to understand him in an emotional sense. Even in this chapter, it feels like Gojo doesn't fully connect to Yuta. His facial expressions are kind of muted and like he's talking to someone that he doesn't truly see as strong, which I do think is the case, especially when you compare this to the way he talks to Sukuna. Yuta, on the other hand, talks to Gojo the way Kashimo talks to Sukuna. There's an obvious understanding of strength from the weaker to the stronger, and much like Sukuna with Kashimo, I do think Gojo sees Yuta as strong, but it's clear there's still a wide gap between them. This gap is pretty quickly closed as Yuta literally enters Gojo's body in order to rejoin the battle. It's a very interesting and unique way to climax Yuta's character, and it's not something that is done often in anime or media in general, frankly. It is a daring twist that is rarely done in shonen as standard as Jujutsu Kaisen, and I think it's executed extremely well with one exception. Where does it leave Yuji in the story? He was kind of sidelined in exchange for round 2 of Gojo and Sukuna. This will probably be resolved in like the very next chapter, but this isn't even a Yuji video, so we'll talk about that at another time. Thinking about where Yuta's character began and seeing how far he's come from that depressed teen is really impressive. He has some of the most stark character development in Jujutsu Kaisen, so it's sad that in the end he couldn't escape the fate handed to him at the beginning. If you enjoyed this video, please be sure to subscribe. It really helps the channel out, and if you watched all the way to the end, you obviously enjoy the content. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you again next week for another video.